I'd like to introduce the next speaker. So going back to the example of strategy and tactics and the necessary preparations for a successful startup, like in battle, you need very good morale, but also in a startup, you need morale. And often that starts with the leadership. Morale, positive thinking has a huge, significant impact in the success or failure of a certain project. So I'd like to warmly introduce to you all Dipti Salopek. She's the VP of Learning and Growth at Snyk. And today's title of this session is Leadership Mindset Through Challenging Times. Dipti, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Adam. And I'm happy to take it forward. Just a quick check. Can you see my slides at this point?
Now I can.
Perfect. Perfect. Brilliant. Well, so as Adam said with this kind introduction, I'm Dipti Salopek. I lead the learning and growth function at Snyk. I have been a people leader in the tech startup space for many years now, and I've followed the volatility of boom and bust cycles for a couple of decades. One of the things that's become clear to me is that, particularly during challenging times, it is really the mindset of the leaders that can be a key determinant of success. So I wanted to talk about this today as we navigate an incredibly challenging environment, especially for startups. So why do I want to focus on leadership mindset when there's all this that's going wrong in the economy? You might ask, I wonder. And the answer is this. When it comes to early stage startups, mostly success is determined by the leader being the kind of person that you want to take a bet on. Because startup life is hard, and you all know this better than me. Does the person have the grit, the passion, the drive to actually go through all of these challenging times? Everything else, the product market fit, the financing, etc., is critical, but it will fall into place if you have the right leaders at the helm. And as a leader in the startup world, you are navigating some of the most challenging environments startups ever need to face. You have suddenly seen at the beginning of this year a shift from abundance to scarcity, which is a shift from growth at all costs to efficient growth all of a sudden. And this, all of a sudden, in the snap of fingers, has switched the rules of the road upon you. And the same people who were stressing about how you should invest in future growth are now suddenly asking you about your route to profitability. And all of this in a very challenging sales environment as well. So at the same time as you're being pushed for profitability on the one side, you might be seeing a climate where customers are either cutting costs or pushing out costs so that your revenue pipeline is getting constrained. And then there's the context of rising inflationary costs that's putting pressure on your cash burn. So a lot of startup leaders are in this very challenging space at the moment, pushed between all these different pressures. And it would be very natural if you feel the pressure building up for yourself. So here's a few tips navigating this environment. And I'll tell you at the outset that this is not my field of expertise. These are collated from a lot of discussions and readings from more experienced leaders. But I lay this out just to explain the kind of pressure that all of you are facing today. 1, you have got to have at least 18 to 24 months of cash runway. Many of you have this already, especially if you raise money in the last 12 months. But if you don't have this, you probably need to reduce burn and raise cash, despite the low valuation, which I know none of us want to raise cash in this environment. And you need to plan for different financial scenarios. What if your customer churn increases, as a lot of us are seeing in today's world? What would you do then? Or if your cash burn increases because of inflationary pressures, what would your plan be? Or if your growth in new business and new revenue goes down and your pipeline shrinks, how would you respond to that? Just model it out and have a plan B. You need the 18 to 24 months of runway. 2, continue investing in very targeted areas. So don't cut everything, even if you do need to cut costs. Focus your cuts on places where you will struggle to make headway in this economic climate, no matter how much money you pour into it, because that's not worth the cost at this point. So for early stage companies, you probably want to keep investing in product development if you can. And prioritize ruthlessly. So don't make cuts in people and then spread the same amount of work across less people. It won't get done. Prioritization and focus are key because that is the only way to do more with less. The more you focus, the more you can actually accelerate your growth. 3, protect your core business. Assuming that you have good product market fit, it is much harder and more expensive to get new customers than it is to keep your current ones. So keep your current customers close and measure customer health. Which ones are struggling financially themselves? Where have you lost your key champion or your exec sponsor because of churn on the customer side? Know what's going on with your customers so that you can prioritize your energy and focus on the critical ones at any point in time. And finally, 4, track your leading indicators. You're probably thinking you already track revenue, win rates, pipeline. You've got a good handle. You've got tons of metrics. But here's a tip. In times of uncertainty, those actually become lagging indicators. Leading indicators are really your top of funnel activity, your website traffic, your signups, your qualified leads, your demos that are being requested. All that demand gen conversation that you heard just before this, those are your leading indicators. A lot of companies don't track these as thoroughly as they do like revenue and win rates. So now is the time to start because these are the metrics that give you a true read on your pipeline when things are uncertain. And so in summary, make sure that you have or build an 18 to 24 month cash runway. This gives you the buffer that you need to continue running your business and making investments. Continue targeted investments, cut your costs and manage your burn, but continue investing in your core product. Protect your core business. Your current customers are more precious now than ever. And track your leading indicators, as these will help predict where your pipeline is going to be and what direction it's heading in. So there's a lot you can do, and most of what I shared probably wasn't news to you. It's been percolating in your mind anyway, but it's all a lot harder than it seems to put this into practice. It's easy for me to give tips on what to do. The hard part is actually being able to see a path to make these happen. To look past all of the challenges that are coming your way and still keep your path and forge forward. And heads up, some of these challenges that I covered won't even be caused by external factors like the ones I talked about. Some of these challenges are really internal to you. These inner challenges are tricky because they're often invisible, like leaders holding themselves back by self-doubt or lack of confidence or feeling overwhelmed, or a difficulty in prioritizing or decision making. And all of this is perfectly natural given everything that's happening in the world today. But these can be worked on. And with the right level of awareness, you as a leader can learn to spot and respond to these. And in the face of adversity, our mindset influences the lens through which we view the world, and therefore how we in turn can actually respond to it. It absolutely determines how we show up as leaders every single day. So let's talk a little bit about leadership mindset. And I'm going to go over 5 levels of leadership mindset next. They're adapted from the Energy Leadership Framework by Bruce D. Schneider, if anyone wants to look it up and learn more. There are actually 7 levels in the framework, but I'm just focusing on the 5 levels that are most relevant to this conversation today. And why am I going through these levels? Really, the purpose is to drive awareness. If you can understand your current mindset and the choices that are available to you, you can then choose the kind of leader you want to be and be intentional in how you respond to the circumstances around you. So let's jump in for a moment. Level 1. When someone is at level 1, they believe that they're a victim of their circumstances and that everything is happening to them. They feel powerless, like they're lacking control, overwhelmed, helpless. And as a result, they may resort to avoidance or dragging their feet or being held back by self doubt. If you at times find yourself in this level one space, know that it is totally normal given all the challenges around you and everything that I covered just before. So much of the headwinds we are facing right now are entirely out of our control, so it would be natural to feel helpless. Avoidance, which is or like dragging your feet on decisions, is the classic level one response. And it's your mind's way of protecting you from having to confront those very difficult feelings of helplessness and fear. But if you want to step into your own as a leader, you will have to find a way to climb out of this. And so let's talk about level two. When someone's at level two, they perceive a space of conflict. You may feel frustration, irritation, anger, and as a consequence, they may find themselves digging their heels in, arguing a lot. Or commonly, people can move into directive mode or slip into command and control mode and start barking orders. So think about what's happening in the world today and everything we talked about earlier with how so many startups have caught between investors who want profitability and an incredibly difficult sales environment, and then add to that rising inflationary costs. So the pressure builds, and you might find yourself very easily in this level two space. And if you do, it's okay. It's totally normal for what you're facing. Moving into command and control mode can also be beneficial because it enables you to get things done quickly. But it's a short-term strategy. And in the long run, it'll undermine your relationships and trust that are so fundamental to being able to be a successful leader and a powerful leader. So it's just important to be able to recognize in yourself when you slip into level two mode, and so that you have the opportunity to change it if you want to. So let's talk about level three. At this level, one is just focused on achieving the goal at hand. With this in mind, one feels willing to compromise or get the task done. As a result, one would typically resort to finding a means of cooperation or coping, or even finding the silver lining in something just to be able to move things ahead. If you find yourself saying, it is what it is, you're in this level three space of coping. Or you might be able to find a silver lining in a situation. You aren't getting what you want, but here's a way to see the light at the end of the tunnel and just start forging a path forward. Instead of feeling helpless, which was level one, or blaming others, which is level two, you start to take responsibility and see that you can move forward. This is your first point of shift into a positive mindset and a good starting point to be at. The big advantage of level three is that you're starting to find a way to stay focused on your goal and get things done. You are no longer stuck. And then there's level four. At level four, you're no longer focused on your own problems. You've moved past that, and you're primarily driven by concern for others. The underlying feeling here you experience at this level is empathy and compassion. As a consequence, you frequently will find yourself choosing to act at the service of others. And think of the concept of servant leadership here. During tough times, you will often find leaders move here, empathizing with clients who are facing a hard time and struggling to pay their bills, or worried for your employees and how to take care of them when they are stressed and anxious and insecure. Depending on the needs of your company, this might be a great place to choose to operate from a place of compassion. The watch out at this level I'll leave you with is that if you don't set healthy boundaries for yourself, some leaders can find themselves always putting others first before themselves, and just giving, giving, giving at the expense of their own well-being. So just watch out and put your own oxygen mask on first. And finally, there's level 5. At this level, your core thought is one of win-win. You see opportunity everywhere. You feel energized and things start clicking so that you feel a sense of peace and quiet confidence. As a result, you inspire solutions and drive towards them. This is where great leaders typically resonate. You can see the opportunity in everything, and including just having faith in the people around you. You see solutions and drive towards them with enthusiasm. This mindset inspires energy and trust from others, and they find themselves following you willingly because your optimism and confidence are contagious, and your people need that in these uncertain times. The watch out at this level, and of course there's always one, is that you might see so many opportunities and they might all seem so exciting that it's challenging to prioritize and focus on the few that truly would be needle shifters in a world of limited resources. You know the quote, we can do anything, but we can't do everything. That's the lookout at this level you need to think about. You cannot choose what life throws at you, but you can choose how you respond. So you've seen the 5 levels of mindset that are available to you as leaders. Your mindset is a conscious choice you can make. You have a think about where your mindset is today. And any of these levels would be absolutely normal in our circumstances. Just think of how difficult it is, what we are going through. I've said it before, and it bears repeating. This is one of the hardest times that startups can go through. And we'll be here for a while. This will take resilience and determination. And above all, an intentionality around how you want to choose to deal with it. Sorry. The key lies in self-awareness. Know where you are at and what the other levels are that are available to you. And with that awareness, you're empowered with choice. Be intentional about choosing the kind of mindset you want to have. If you're at level 1 where you feel helpless, what does it look like to be at level 2 where you fight for what you want? Or level 3 where you're willing to cooperate or compromise to get the most important part of your goal? Or level 4 where your primary concern is for those around you? Or even level 5 where you see the opportunity in everything? Ask yourself, how would you show up at level 5? What would you do differently than you do today? What would you do differently than you currently do today? One of the things you can do is focus on being a leader in your business. In deciding to invest in your company, your investors took a leap of faith in you. In joining your organization, your people have taken a bet on you in terms of their passions, their careers, their livelihoods. You need to turn up as a leader for all of them. And so I leave you with a couple thoughts on how you can put level 5 leadership into action in today's environment. Number 1, manage your talents tridently. If you need to manage your burn, if you need to make cuts, this is an opportunity to optimize your talent for the needs of the future. You cannot afford to carry around extra weight at a time like this. It is not fair to your hardest working workers. If you're going to be lean, if you are forced to be lean, don't make cuts more than you need to. But if you are forced to be lean, then you only have room for the best of the best on board. A lot of startups haven't really taken the time to think through how to assess performance or talent. Have a discussion with your leadership team on how do you actually know who your top performers are and who might be pulling their weight or who isn't. What does strong performance look like? Sometimes it's the people who are culture carriers. Sometimes it's the people who are getting stuff done. Sometimes it's the people who are the glue that pull everything else together. How do you define talent? And do you know who's at risk of attrition? Learn your talent and manage it. Be in control. Number 2, be as transparent as possible. You owe this to your people. This is especially hard when the news isn't good. I get it. How do you keep people motivated and committed if the numbers aren't looking good? Why wouldn't they jump ship? Our instinct can often be to protect our people from the worst of the worries. What I'll tell you is this: people can sniff out evasiveness miles away, and it only comes across as phony. I've seen this again and again and again. So maybe you don't want to share how worried you are, but you do need to share the facts. People need context to be able to make their own decisions. Ideally, you can lay out the facts about how things are, but then also to show the path out of the woods. Trust your team to respond to this as the adults you hired them to be. You don't always need to have good news. What you need is to be authentic and honest and show people that you can be trusted to lead the company through this challenging time. Number 3, over communicate. People need to hear your messages multiple times before it will sink in, partly due to information overload, but also because people are always listening for what's important versus what's just noise. And the more you repeat yourself, people will take away the message that this is truly important to you. Repeat it in different forms, like a campaign, written announcements, town halls, smaller team meetings where people have the opportunity to ask questions in a more trusted environment. This will help messages really percolate. You might feel like you're repeating yourself a lot because you are, but what we're finding is that employees need to hear messages at least 5 times before they really start to register. So do not underestimate the importance of this. Be a wartime leader. And believe me, I use the phrase wartime with so much hesitation, especially today. I wish there was another term. But the main point is that operating under adversity is fundamentally different from leading during times of abundance. Make tough decisions as early as possible. Do not drag your feet. And there will be a lot of them. Again, do not drag your feet here. Pushing the can down the road is level 1 avoidance. But equally, once a decision is made, be compassionate and empathetic in how you roll these out, especially with the tougher decisions. Be authentic to who you are and your values. At the same time, you need to be firm with your decisions because you need this in order to chart a course forward. Have strength in your convictions because you will face a lot of resistance and foot dragging from others, especially to the difficult decisions that they don't buy into. Speed will matter a lot. You'll need to be decisive with very limited and probably evolving information. Flatten out your hierarchy so that information flows move up and down and laterally across your organization as quickly as possible. Really, flatter hierarchies make a huge difference here. And then 5, finally, always be learning. I'm sure that you've heard the phrase, strong opinions loosely held, which is be decisive because you must lead with conviction, inspire confidence, but never attach your ego to these ideas. Always be listening to those around you, especially those with opinions that differ from yours, assessing your environment for evidence that the context is evolving or that your course of action that you chose may not have been the optimal one and you need to course correct. Know what your performance indicators are, even those leading indicators we talked about before, and watch them closely for evidence that learning, pivoting, growing, course correcting might be in order. And so, in summary, manage your talent proactively, be on top of it, be as transparent as possible. Trust your people as you want them to trust you. Over communicate again and again and again. Be a wartime leader. Be decisive and swift and agile. And always be learning. Check your ego at the door and always be scanning your environment and listening to those around you. So, as we wrap up, I urge you to step into your self confidence. If you can build a high growth startup, you're already doing one of the hardest jobs in the world. You know that you have the grit and the drive and the creativity to push through this. Lean into those strengths. Trust that you have what it takes to get you through this journey, however long it is. But it will be challenging and it will probably push you to your limits. But you can choose the kind of leader that you want to show up as through these turbulent times. I can see that there's a session on growth mindset a bit later today, and I'm not the speaker for that one, but I suspect you'll learn a lot more on being a level 5 leader in that session, so stay tuned. And finally, I wrap up with this quote. I want to leave you with this from Viktor Frankl, who was an Austrian psychiatrist. Between stimulus and response, there is space. In that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and freedom. So thank you. And with that, let me turn it over to Q&A and stop sharing my slide.
Well, I have to say, Dipti, that was an excellent, very profound presentation. I have to say, virtually all those points spoke to my heart, and I really do like the aspect of highlighting from the book you referenced, a level 5 leader, almost essentially being able to leverage chaos into a tool of yours so you can persevere and go forward instead of kind of having this, okay, I look at everything, every nail is a problem, I'm going to mentally shut down type of attitude, which I don't know if that's a product of the educational system, but I do think that over time, very often people are afraid to make mistakes. And I think the wrong part of your brain is thinking if you have to do something, important, so to say, putting yourself in essentially a constant state of panic. And I like the phrase that you used, a wartime president. A lot of those virtues and characteristics are, absolutely, necessary. I mean, you look throughout the progression of human history and some of the great heroes from antiquity to modern days. They all have a certain type of configuration of these. And what I wanted to ask you on that is, if somebody is aspiring to be a leader, or if somebody is placed in a situation where they have to assume leadership, how do they strike the right balance between, let's say, strength, so people can be at ease, people can trust in that leader and have confidence going forward, but also a certain level of vulnerability where, the team can relate to the leader at the same time?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of the hardest conundrums today. And especially when you have such a challenging environment, it's like, which one is more important? Do you today want to appear vulnerable, or do you want to appear strong? Like, you constantly have to keep switching between them, right? And and maybe let me jump into this point first, but I want to touch on a couple other things that you mentioned as well. And this notion of strength and vulnerability, the way we look at it in our company, and we talk a lot about this, is your strength comes in your openness and your vulnerability. They aren't dichotomous. If you have the confidence to say, here's an opinion I'm going to put forth because of my experience, but I'm open to the fact that it might not be the best answer and there might be better out there, that's your strength in your vulnerability. In fact, it makes you stronger. Vulnerability just needs to be openness. It's humility. It just needs to be openness to the idea that you might not always be right. And that's all it
Sure.
takes. And that suddenly harnesses for a lot of other people the ability to come forth, to step forth, to look at you as a leader, to input into the dialogue. I think I was at a talk where with another leader, and one of the things that they said is the big jump between those who are managers and those who are leaders. And I'm not talking about level or designation or title. This appears at all levels of the organization, but it's a mindset shift. And the real shift is people who are leaders are willing to ask a lot more questions, and spend a lot less time trying to assert their own opinions, because they're comfortable in their own skin. They're comfortable with their credibility. What they really want is to make space for other voices. And that's a huge shift that today is, I would say, critically important for anyone to survive and show their strength as a leader.
Right. And, a historical example, which may not be entirely obvious, but I think it will resonate. Genghis Khan, I think during the 1200s, obviously created a land empire spanning essentially from East Asia to the frontier of Western Europe. This is a
Yeah.
tremendous amount of land. One of the, I guess you could say, peculiar facts about him is that, I guess you could say, anytime there was a battle or a war, he gave the loot. You could say like the gold, the treasure, and whatnot. And mind you, these are brutal times and terrible things happened. This is more of a point to, let's say, commanding the loyalty of a team. He would give the loot to his actual soldiers and officers instead of kind of hoarding it for himself, which many leaders, feudal lords tended to do in those days. They take,
Mhm.
they take 90% of it and kind of give the scraps to everybody else. And it seemed like it was actually quite the opposite, in that case as well. And another peculiar thing was it was most noted to being the most, you could say, it was a true meritocracy, as many historians describe it. So it was a multi-ethnic, multicultural empire. You had members of, society in the military as far east as Korea and as far west as Hungary. And these are people, let's say, reaching positions, very high positions, without essentially their ethnicity or culture being a factor. And in fact, many Christians, Muslims, Jewish people, all different types of religions. And it seems like for that time, ethnicities and cultures were represented. So it seems
Yeah.
to me maybe that you could say giving and sharing the loot is almost kind of like giving a part of yourself, both emotionally and physically in many ways, to the trust of your team, because then they feel like they can count on you, so to say. And like I said, it is a historical example, but, some of those things, they do prove effective when doing something that is very difficult or very large.
Yeah, Adam, I love how you have a historical analogy for every
Oh,
context.
I'm a
It's
huge
just coming
history
out of
nerd.
you. But I would say on that, right? Like you can take it very literally and say, "Hey, compensate your people for what they're
Right,
doing," and you should. But I
right,
think the deeper underlying message in what you're saying is one of empowerment across the board. And I touched
right,
on it in a different way by saying flatten your hierarchy, but it's the same concept. Like be in touch with the entire diversity of your
right, exactly.
population. Don't tuck them in hidden corners all over your org. Hear all those voices quickly and directly, hear them yourself, and empower them with decision making. So if there's ever a time to flatten your hierarchy, it is when you are in wartime mode.
Wow, wonderfully put. And to add to that as well, which I think also
Mhm.
adds to the richness of your presentation, a lot of times when it came to, let's say, the Mongols expanding their empire, a lot of times when they go to these little like city-state, you could say castle villages, a lot of times people would outright surrender because a lot of times it was feudalism and people were giving up 95% of their crops to the feudal lord at the time. So, I mean, are you going to get a lot of people to fight for you, in those circumstances, so to say? And I also noticed too, with Genghis Khan, he lived a very frugal life as well, using wooden, utensils, wooden chopsticks, even like, spoons and bowls and things like that, and gave kind of the rest of the more lavish things, to the troops. And it seems like throughout history, that type of discipline seems to be a very enduring type of concept among, very great leaders. Some kind of abstinence in some part of the life. It seems to be like a recurring theme, and maybe these things also play out in the modern day in Web3 startups. Having that discipline, having that kind of ability to share, like we learned as
Yeah.
kids, the ability to share, and look
Yeah.
outside of yourself when you do things.
Absolutely, 100%. And I wanted to touch on a point that you made earlier, how people can be terrified of making mistakes. And you're absolutely right. The pressure to be perfect is incredible. And especially in startup mode, you have a razor thin buffer to get things wrong. What I would say in this is the founder of Snyk, he often says this quote, which is win or learn. There is no failure. And I
Right.
really would love to leave the audience with this. Do not get hung up on mistakes. It's either you're winning or you are learning and growing. There is no concept of a mistake or a failure.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel, as an individual or as in groups, if you can treat every experience, like that as well, I think I think it emotionally and psychologically strengthens people, but I think it makes you smarter over the time if you're able to train yourself or adapt yourself into a more nuanced thinking of things. And I mean, I'm sure anybody would be surprised, like how many times in your life has something not gone the way you wanted, but it kind of opened an opportunity somewhere else. These things are not very obvious to us. And I think it's almost like a hubris to think at this very moment, I know everything I need to know about now, the past, and the future. I mean, listen, things go wrong. I don't really know where this will end up navigating towards. So, stay calm, keep an open mind, and see what kind of data you can get from it. I think if you can kind of look at it as like a data, or like you said, some sort of learning experience, then everything becomes a tool at the end of the day, which is great.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know I personally have had the experience where I've lost a job I was in, which was an incredibly
Sure.
difficult experience,
Oh
and
yeah, for
then
sure.
ended up in the best opportunity I've ever had in my life.
Oh yeah.
And I'm sure I'm not the only person. People have gone through this time and time again. It is the notion that with the right mindset, everything can be a growth opportunity for something better.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it's almost underestimated. I think the power of the mind and the spirit, to a team, to a group, to anything. And in fact, it actually may even mean more than sometimes the very tools that you have. Because let's say if I think in a lot of cases, I think if there's too much, let's say, comfort, or let's say if you're dealing with teams who have it too easy, they may tend to reflexively run away from the first sign of trouble. So maybe they don't have that calloused type of grit yet, so to say. But if you're able to kind of push through, but also constructively learning, um, you know, you will ultimately be better than let's say competitors who maybe 3-1, 4-1, have that kind of advantage, over you. So going back to the teams, everything you said resonated very well. And I have to say, I was actually going to ask you for a copy of the presentation so I could look at it later too. But these things aren't talked about enough, it seems. The technology is great, don't get me wrong. And maybe some of the socioeconomic and geopolitical things, those are good things to focus on. But what about these very almost, you could say very nuanced and almost primal parts of human nature that need to be accounted for whenever these things, whenever these projects are going to start.
Yeah,
I mean,
absolutely. And
and I
that's
think
why
you
I
hit on those
went
points.
through, yeah, thank you. And that's why I went through those 5 levels to help people understand. Like, if you're in avoidance, if you're running away, it's okay. It's natural. That's one of the 5 levels that people commonly resort to. So it's really about normalizing this so that it isn't a scary concept. But that's also why a huge thanks to all of you for hosting a conference like this, by creating the space and allowing the space for these kind of critical conversations.
And thank you, such as yourself and leaders like yourself for coming on and very, generously, offering your time to really expand upon these things, because a lot of these things, you can read as many books as you want, but they may not be entirely intuitive or digestible at the time. So these type of forums allow people to learn these things at a much easier and faster way. So, Dipti, thank you very much for coming on. I had a great time with this presentation, and certainly I look forward to keeping in touch with you as well.
Likewise, me too, and my absolute pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.